John Carter was a simple man, a space miner by trade. He spent his days digging through asteroids, pulling out rare minerals, and selling them to the highest bidder. After a long day of work, all he wanted was a hot meal, a cold drink, and a little peace. Tonight, he sat at his usual booth in the Iron Fork, a small diner on Zeta 9, a dusty space station on the edge of the galaxy. The place smelled of grilled meat and cheap whiskey. Neon lights flickered above, buzzing like lazy insects. John glanced at the menu, but he already knew what he wanted. Steak, he grunted at the robotic waiter. Rare. The bot beeped in response, its mechanical limbs clicking as it rolled away toward the kitchen. John leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. His muscles ached from a long shift, and he just wanted to eat and forget the galaxy for a while. The station was full of all kinds: smugglers, bounty hunters, travelers from 100 worlds. But John didn't care. He kept to himself. A few minutes later, the robotic waiter returned, placing a metal dome-covered plate in front of him. "Your meal, sir," the bot said in its lifeless voice. John licked his lips, ready to dig in. He lifted the cover and froze. It wasn't a steak. It was a girl. A small alien girl with silver skin and glowing blue eyes. She was curled up on the plate, shivering, her tiny hands clutching at a torn piece of fabric around her shoulders. She looked no older than 10. John blinked, thinking he was hallucinating. He had seen strange things before, but this was new. The girl stared at him, terrified. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Help me. They're coming." John's instincts, honed from years of surviving in the rough edges of space, kicked in. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. He quickly placed the cover back over the plate, acting natural. His pulse quickened. Who was she? Why was she here? And who was after her? He glanced around the diner. The bartender was watching him a little too closely. A group of men in dark uniforms sat in a far corner, their eyes locked on his booth. One of them whispered into a communicator. John knew trouble when he saw it. His stomach growled, but eating was the last thing on his mind. Slowly, he lifted the cover just a crack. The girl was still there, her glowing blue eyes wide with fear. "Stay quiet," he murmured under his breath. The men in the corner stood up. They were coming his way. John made a decision. Fast. With one swift move, he grabbed the plate, tucked the girl under his jacket, and stood up, forcing a casual smile. "Food's cold," he muttered to the robotic waiter. "I'm getting a refund." Then he walked, not ran, walked, toward the back exit. Running would make him a target. The men in dark uniforms followed. John reached the door. It was locked. He cursed under his breath. The girl whimpered softly against his chest. One of the men spoke, voice sharp as a blade. "Put the girl down, miner. She doesn't belong to you." John turned slowly. 5 of them. Armed. Well-trained. He grinned. "I don't see a name tag on her." The leader, a bald man with a scar across his nose, stepped forward. "We don't have time for jokes. Hand her over, and we won't kill you." John sighed. "See, the problem is, I'm really bad at sharing." Then, without warning, he threw the plate at them. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was enough of a distraction. The metal dish clanged against the floor, skidding toward their feet. John grabbed a chair and hurled it next. Then he did what he did best. He ran. Shoving past a waiter, he sprinted through the kitchen, dodging hot grills and angry cooks. The girl clung to his chest, her small body trembling. The exit door ahead. It was unlocked. Thank the stars. John burst outside into the alley. Cold night air hit his face. He didn't stop. Behind him, the men were shouting. Gunfire erupted. Bolts of plasma sizzled past him, hitting metal crates and sending sparks into the air. John ducked into a side street, zigzagging through the maze of alleys behind the diner. If he could just make it to the docking bay, his ship, he could get off this station. The girl gripped his jacket tightly. "They won't stop," she whispered. "I know," he panted. A loud explosion shook the ground. They were using grenades now. John turned a sharp corner and slammed into a wall. No, not a wall. A giant. The biggest alien he had ever seen loomed over him, green-skinned with 6 eyes, a blaster the size of John's arm aimed at his head. "You made a mistake, human," the alien rumbled. John groaned. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The alien grinned. And then, darkness. The chase begins. John woke up to the sharp sting of cold metal pressing against his cheek. His head throbbed, his vision blurry. The last thing he remembered was the towering green alien and the blaster aimed at his skull. Now he was lying on the floor of a dimly lit room, the metallic hum of the space station vibrating beneath him. But something was wrong. Too quiet. The constant buzz of the station's life, voices, footsteps, machines, was gone. It felt like the entire world had gone silent. John pushed himself up slowly, his muscles aching. The girl. Where was she? His heart pounded in his chest. He scanned the room. Metal walls, flickering lights, and a single door sealed shut. But no sign of the alien girl. Then he heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Like someone knocking on metal. John turned toward the sound. It was coming from inside the room. But he was alone. Wasn't he? The tapping grew louder, more urgent. Suddenly, the wall across from him shifted. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a small, dark space behind it. And there she was. The alien girl, crouched in the shadows, her glowing blue eyes wide with fear. She was clutching a small metallic device, a translator. Before John could speak, she pressed a finger to her lips. "Shay," she whispered through the device. "They're listening." John's pulse quickened. He crawled toward her, keeping his voice low. "Who are they?" he whispered. The girl's eyes darted to the door. "Hunters. They track me everywhere." John frowned. "Why you? What do they want?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Because of what I am." Before John could ask more, the door hissed open. Footsteps. Heavy, getting closer. John didn't have time to think. He grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her into the hidden space with him. They squeezed together, barely able to breathe as the footsteps grew louder. Through the crack in the panel, John saw them. 3 hunters in black armor, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They moved like shadows, silent and deadly. One of them spoke, his voice cold and mechanical. "The humans awake. The girl's here. I can feel it." John held his breath. The girl's hand trembled in his. The hunter moved closer to their hiding spot, his blaster raised. John's mind raced. Think. Think. Then, out of nowhere, the girl did something unexpected. She closed her eyes, and suddenly the metal walls around them began to vibrate. John's eyes widened. The vibration grew stronger until the entire room began to shake. The hunters stumbled, trying to keep their balance. And then, boom! The lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness. The girl grabbed John's arm. "Run." They burst out of the hidden panel, sprinting past the disoriented hunters. John didn't look back. He could hear the shouts, the blaster fire, but he focused on one thing: escape. They raced through the narrow corridors of the station, weaving through maintenance tunnels and abandoned sections no one used anymore. John's lungs burned, but he didn't stop. The girl's strange powers had bought them time, but the hunters wouldn't give up. Finally, they reached the docking bay. John spotted his old ship, the Rust Bucket, sitting in the corner like a faithful dog waiting for its master. They dashed up the ramp, and John slammed the hatch shut behind them. "Hold on," he shouted, racing to the cockpit. The ship groaned as it powered up, the old engines coughing to life. John yanked the controls, and the Rust Bucket lifted off the ground, just as the hunters burst into the bay, firing wildly. Laser blasts ricocheted off the ship's hull as John punched the thrusters. They were airborne, but they weren't safe. The girl collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, her face pale. John glanced at her. "All right, kid. Time to tell me what the hell is going on." She looked at him, her eyes full of secrets. "I'm not from your galaxy," she whispered. "And if they catch me, they'll destroy Earth." John's heart skipped a beat. Before he could respond, the ship's radar blared. Incoming ships, dozens of them. The chase wasn't over. It had just begun. The truth revealed. The stars outside the cockpit blurred into streaks of light as the rust bucket shot through hyperspace, but John Carter wasn't admiring the view. His hands were tight on the controls, his jaw clenched. The ship rattled and groaned like it was about to fall apart any second. But it wasn't the ship he was worried about. It was her. The alien girl sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out into space, her silver skin glowing faintly under the dim cockpit lights. She looked small, fragile even. But John had seen enough to know looks could be deceiving. Finally, after minutes of silence, he spoke. "All right," he growled. "Start talking." The girl didn't turn to look at him. Her voice was soft but steady. "My name is Lyra. I'm from the Andralis system, and I'm not supposed to be here." John snorted. "Yeah, I figured that much when you showed up on my dinner plate." Lyra flinched, her glowing eyes dropping to her hands. She fidgeted with the translator device strapped to her wrist. John softened his tone just a little. "Look, I saved your skin back there. The least you can do is tell me why half the galaxy wants you dead." Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "Because of what I can do." Before John could ask what that meant, the ship jerked violently, throwing him against the control panel. "What the?" The ship's warning system blared. "Gravitational anomaly detected." John looked out the window and felt his stomach drop. A swirling mass of light and darkness appeared ahead. A wormhole, but not like any he'd ever seen. It wasn't natural. It was moving, chasing them. And then Lyra did something that made John's blood run cold. She raised her hand, and the swirling mass slowed down. John stared at her, his heart pounding. "What the hell are you?" Lyra's voice trembled. "I didn't mean to. I can't control it sometimes." John slammed his fist on the console, struggling to keep the ship steady. "You're telling me you just messed with a gravitational field? That's not something a kid can just accidentally do." Lyra finally met his eyes. "I'm not a kid." John blinked. "Could have fooled me." Lyra took a deep breath, her glowing eyes flickering. "I'm a starborn. My people, we're connected to the energy of the universe, but I'm different. I can control it in ways I'm not supposed to." John shook his head, trying to process. "And those hunters, they're after you because of that." Lyra nodded. "If they catch me, they'll use my powers to destroy planets. They've already done it before." John stared at her. Destroy planets. This was bigger than he thought. Suddenly, the ship's radar blared again. John cursed under his breath and checked the screen. Enemy ships, dozens of them, closing in fast. "They tracked us through hyperspace," John muttered. "That's impossible." Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "Not if they've marked me." John's mind raced. He had faced bounty hunters, pirates, and smugglers before. But this was out of his league. And yet, as he looked at Lyra, this strange, powerful girl, he knew one thing. He couldn't abandon her. John took a deep breath, his hand steady on the controls. "All right, kid. Looks like we're in this together." Lyra's eyes widened. "You're not scared?" John gave her a crooked smile. "I've been in tighter spots. Besides," he flicked a switch, and the ship's engines roared. "I'm just getting started." As the enemy ships closed in, John pushed the rust bucket to its limits, diving into an asteroid field, with Lyra's strange powers humming in the background. The truth was out. but the real fight had just begun. Fight or flight. The cockpit lights flickered as the rust bucket spiraled through the asteroid field, dodging massive, jagged rocks that spun like deadly knives in the void of space. John's knuckles turned white on the controls, sweat dripping down his temple. Every second felt like a coin flip between survival and becoming cosmic debris. Behind them, the enemy ships were relentless, sleek, black hunters cutting through the asteroids like wolves in a flock of sheep. Their weapons fired bursts of plasma that lit up the darkness, each shot coming closer to ripping the old mining ship apart. John gritted his teeth. "Damn it, Lyra. I'm running out of tricks here." But Lyra wasn't listening. She sat frozen in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes rolled back, her silver skin pulsing with a faint blue light. Something was happening. The ship groaned as another plasma blast clipped their rear thrusters. The warning alarms screamed, and smoke started filling the cockpit. John cursed, slamming a fist on the dashboard. "Lyra, snap out of it." Suddenly, the temperature dropped. Frost formed on the inside of the cockpit windows, creeping like spiderwebs across the glass. John's breath hitched in his throat. He turned to Lyra, and for the first time, he felt fear. Her body hovered an inch above her seat, her hair floating as if she were underwater. The air around her shimmered, warping like heat waves in reverse. And then, the stars outside the window started to bend. John's eyes widened. What the hell? The asteroids that were moments from smashing into them shifted, moving just out of reach as if some invisible force was pushing them aside. The enemy ships behind them faltered, their sleek forms suddenly jerking, colliding with the drifting rocks they couldn't avoid. One by one, the hunters were being crushed by the very asteroid field they chased John into. Lyra's lips moved, but no sound came out. It was like she was speaking to the universe itself, and the universe was listening. John wanted to be amazed, but he was terrified. This wasn't normal. This wasn't human. And it was too much. With a sudden burst of energy, Lyra's glow intensified, and a shockwave rippled through the ship, slamming John against the controls. Boom! The entire cockpit went dark. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the emergency lights flickered back on, casting a dim red glow over everything. The ship was still. The asteroids were gone. The hunters were gone. And Lyra. She slumped forward in her seat, unconscious, her skin pale and dim. John scrambled to her side, shaking her gently. "Lyra? Hey, wake up." No response. John checked the ship's systems. The engines were barely holding together, and the life support was on its last legs. They couldn't stay here. But Lyra looked fragile, like using her powers had drained something deep inside her. Maybe something she couldn't get back. John ran a hand through his hair, staring at her. He didn't know what she was, or why she was here, but one thing was clear. She wasn't just some scared alien girl anymore. She was something dangerous. And now she was his responsibility. John sighed, settling into the pilot's seat. "All right, kid. Let's find somewhere to hide before the rest of those bastards catch up." He set a course for the nearest uncharted moon, praying the ship would hold together long enough to get them there. As the rust bucket limped through space, John glanced at Lyra one last time. What the hell have I gotten myself into? The bargain. The moon they landed on wasn't on any official star maps, which was exactly why John chose it. A dead rock floating in the middle of nowhere, wrapped in thick, gray clouds that choked out any light from the distant suns. It was the kind of place smugglers used to hide stolen cargo or bodies no one wanted found. But tonight, it was their only chance. The rust bucket groaned as it touched down on the jagged surface. Sparks flew from the thrusters, and the ship tilted dangerously before settling with a heavy thud. John muttered a curse under his breath and shut down the engines. For a moment, there was nothing but silence inside the cockpit. Then, from behind him, a weak voice whispered, "Where are we?" John spun around. Lyra was awake, her glowing blue eyes half-lidded, her skin pale and damp with sweat. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the hours she'd been unconscious. "We're somewhere safe," John said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "At least for now." Lyra tried to sit up but winced, clutching her side. John moved to help her, but she waved him off. "They'll find us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They always find me." John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not if I can help it." But even as he said the words, the ship's comm system crackled to life. John froze. The screen in front of him flickered, then displayed a symbol he didn't recognize. A jagged black star with a bleeding red circle in the middle. A voice followed. Cold. Inhuman. "John Carter, we know you have the girl. Hand her over, and we will let you live." John's heart pounded. He looked at Lyra, who was shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't trust them," she whispered. "They'll kill you anyway." John knew she was right. He'd dealt with enough bounty hunters and mercenaries to know a bad deal when he heard one. But this wasn't just about him anymore. Before he could respond, the voice continued. "You have 1 hour. Refuse, and we'll turn this moon to dust." The comms went dead. John stared at the screen, his mind racing. He was a miner, not a soldier. His ship was falling apart, and he was running out of options. The smart thing, the easy thing, would be to hand Lyra over and walk away. But something about her, something in those glowing blue eyes, made that impossible. John stood up and grabbed his old blaster from the wall. He checked the charge, barely enough for a fight, but it would have to do. Lyra watched him, her expression unreadable. "You're going to fight them?" she asked softly. John met her gaze. "Damn right I am." Lyra's eyes shimmered with something between fear and hope. "Why?" John shrugged. "Because I hate bullies, and I hate being told what to do." For the first time, a small smile flickered across Lyra's face. But before John could savor the moment, the ship shuddered violently. The ground beneath them trembled, and a deep guttural roar echoed through the walls. John rushed to the cockpit window. In the sky above, a massive mothership was descending, its shadow swallowing the moon's surface. It was bigger than any ship John had ever seen, a floating fortress, bristling with weapons and glowing with an ominous red light. The voice returned over the comms. "This is your final warning, human. Hand over the girl, or be destroyed." John's grip tightened on his blaster. He looked at Lyra, who was trembling now, her glowing skin flickering like a dying star. But her voice was steady. "I can help," she whispered, "but it'll cost me." John frowned. "What do you mean?" Lyra's eyes met his, full of something heavy and ancient. "Using my power. It's killing me." John's heart sank. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't sign up for a suicide mission. But there was no turning back now. He took a deep breath. "Then we'll find another way. Together." The mothership's weapons began to glow, preparing to fire. John flipped the ship's comms back on. "You want her," he growled. "Come and get her." As the first blast lit up the sky, John and Lyra prepared for the fight of their lives. Humanity fights back. The first shot from the mothership wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. A blinding beam of red light tore through the sky, slamming into the rocky surface near the rust bucket. The ground exploded in a shower of molten rock and debris, shaking the ship so violently John thought it would crack in half. He didn't wait for the second shot. "Hold on, Lyra," John yelled, slamming his fist into the ignition. The rust bucket coughed like an old man with a bad lung, but miraculously lifted off the ground. The ship groaned under the stress, metal panels rattling as John pulled them into the sky, dodging between plumes of smoke and falling debris. Lyra, still weak from using her powers, clung to the co-pilot's seat, her face pale. But her eyes, those glowing, electric blue eyes, were sharp and focused. "They're going to catch us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. John didn't argue. She was right. The mothership loomed above them, its shadow swallowing the light from distant stars. Asterisk asterisk smaller ships, sleek, black hunters, asterisk asterisk poured out of its underbelly like a swarm of hornets, locking onto the rust bucket with terrifying speed. John's ship wasn't built for this. It was a mining vessel, barely held together with duct tape and sheer willpower. The weapons system was a joke, and the shields. Well, he hadn't checked those in years. But John Carter wasn't the kind of man to go down easy. He flipped the comms on, broadcasting across open channels. "This is John Carter of Station Orion 9. Any miners, smugglers, or freelancers out there? I need backup. Now." Static filled the cockpit. For a few seconds, John thought no one would answer. Then, a gruff voice crackled through. "Carter, you still flying that piece of junk? Thought you'd be dead by now." John grinned. "Old friends. The kind you didn't make in polite company." "Yeah. Well, death's been trying to catch me for years. You in or what? You buying the drinks? If we live, I'll buy the damn bar." The comms lit up with more voices. Miners, smugglers, bounty hunters, all answering John's call. They weren't soldiers. They didn't have shiny ships or fancy weapons, but they had something more dangerous. Nothing to lose. Within minutes, the dark sky around the rust bucket erupted in chaos. John's ragtag fleet burst from hyperspace, old mining rigs and cargo ships rigged with illegal weapons, swarming the hunter ships like angry bees. Blaster fire lit up the void as the unlikely alliance fought back against the alien forces. But the mothership, it didn't even flinch. It hovered above them like a predator watching ants scramble beneath its feet. John knew they couldn't win this fight by brute force. Not against something that size. He turned to Lyra, who was watching the battle unfold with wide, haunted eyes. "You said you can help." She hesitated, her hands trembling. "If I do, I might not survive." John's jaw tightened. This kid wasn't supposed to be a soldier. She wasn't supposed to die on some godforsaken moon because he was too stubborn to back down. But they were out of options. "Then let me give you a fighting chance." Before Lyra could respond, John punched the thrusters, sending the rust bucket diving straight toward the mothership. Alarms blared in protest, warning him of the suicidal course, but he didn't care. The mothership's weapons locked onto them, glowing with deadly energy. At the last possible second, John shouted, "Now, Lyra." Lyra closed her eyes. And the universe bent. The stars twisted. Space itself seemed to ripple like water. The mothership's weapons faltered, their energy beams scattering harmlessly into the void. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then Lyra's body glowed brighter than a supernova, and a pulse of pure energy shot from her, slamming into the mothership with the force of a collapsing star. The mothership shuddered, its massive frame cracking as if the very laws of physics were coming apart. Its sleek black surface peeled away, revealing something underneath, something ancient and unnatural, pulsing with dark energy. John could only stare. But Lyra's body went limp, her glow fading as quickly as it had come. "Lyra!" John shouted, catching her as she slumped forward. She was still breathing, but barely. The mothership wasn't done yet. It groaned like a dying beast, but its weapons were charging again. John knew they had one last chance. "All ships, focus fire on the cracks." He shouted into the comms. His fleet responded with everything they had. Blaster fire, mining lasers, even cargo containers repurposed as makeshift bombs. The sky lit up with explosions as they targeted the weak spots Lyra's power had exposed. The mothership's core began to glow, brighter and brighter, until, boom. The explosion was blinding, a shockwave tearing through space and sending ships spinning. The mothership disintegrated, its remains scattering like ash on the wind. Silence returned to the void. John's fleet floated in the aftermath, battered but alive. But in the cockpit of the rust bucket, John wasn't celebrating. He was holding Lyra, her faint breath the only sound in the ruined ship. and he knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The final stand. The wreckage of the mothership drifted like broken bones across the black sky, its twisted metal reflecting the distant glow of dying stars. But inside the rust bucket, there was no light left. Only the sound of shallow, ragged breathing. John Carter knelt beside Lyra, her silver skin now as pale as moonlight. The faint blue glow that once pulsed beneath her skin had almost faded, like a candle flickering in the wind. Her body was cold to the touch, her breaths coming slower with each passing second. John pressed 2 fingers to her neck, desperate for a stronger pulse. Nothing. No, 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 he muttered, shaking his head. He wasn't going to lose her. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after she'd saved him and the entire damn planet. The comms crackled to life, but John didn't care. Voices from his Ragdig fleet filled the cockpit, celebrating their impossible victory. But for John, the fight wasn't over. He leaned closer to Lyra, his voice rough but steady. "Hey, kid, you didn't come this far just to quit on me now. You hear me? You're tougher than that." But Lyra didn't respond. Her eyes stayed shut, her chest barely moving. John clenched his fists. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't know how to heal whatever damage her powers had caused. But he knew people, dangerous people, who might. His mind raced. There was one place left, a place he'd sworn never to return to. The Black Star Outpost. It was a rogue medical facility hidden in the outskirts of the galaxy, run by exiled scientists, bounty hunters, and outlaws who specialized in the kind of medicine that didn't ask questions. If anyone could save Lyra, it was them. But there was a problem. They didn't work for free. John gritted his teeth and slammed his fist onto the control panel, powering up the rust bucket's battered engines. "Hold on, Lyra. We're not done yet." The journey to the Black Star Outpost was a blur of adrenaline and desperation. John pushed the rust bucket harder than ever, ignoring the groaning metal and warning alarms as the ship tore through hyperspace. When they finally arrived, the outpost looked exactly as John remembered, a floating fortress of rusted metal and flickering lights orbiting a dead star. The place oozed danger. Ships with mismatched parts and illegal modifications drifted lazily in the docking bays. The air was thick with tension and the promise of violence. John carried Lyra in his arms, her limp body barely warm against his chest. As he stepped onto the station, eyes followed him. Hunters, smugglers, and killers. But none dared approach. John Carter had a reputation, and even here, in the darkest corners of the galaxy, that meant something. He made his way to the infirmary, where a figure awaited him. A tall, gaunt man with mechanical eyes that glowed faintly red. "Dr. Voss." "John Carter," Voss said, his voice like gravel. "Didn't think I'd see you again. You owe me." John didn't waste time. "Add it to my tab." "But save her." Voss's mechanical eyes scanned Lyra's fragile form, his brow furrowed. "She's not human." John's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" Voss shrugged. "Not to me. But this," he gestured to Lyra, "this isn't just exhaustion. She's burning out. Whatever power she's using, it's killing her from the inside." John's heart sank. "Then fix it." Voss gave him a long, hard look. "You want me to fix it? Fine. But there's a price." John knew there would be. There was always a price in places like this. "Anything," he growled. Voss's lips curled into a thin smile. "Good. You'll find out soon enough." John watched as Voss and his team of rogue medics wheeled Lyra into the back room. The heavy doors slid shut, leaving John alone in the dim, humming light. All he could do now was wait. Hours passed, or maybe days. John lost track of time. He paced the corridors, his mind racing with every possible outcome. He wasn't the sentimental type, but Lyra wasn't just some alien kid anymore. She was family. When the doors finally opened, Voss stepped out, his expression unreadable. "She's stable," Voss said simply. "But John's heart skipped. But what? Voss's mechanical eyes gleamed. She'll live, but her powers, they're unstable. Next time she uses them like that, there might not be anything left to save. John nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He knew Lyra wasn't safe yet. The galaxy would come for her again. The hunters, the warlords, maybe even something worse. But John Carter wasn't afraid. He walked into the room where Lyra lay, her breathing steady now, color returning to her cheeks. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached. "Hey, kid," he whispered, sitting beside her. "You scared the hell out of me." Lyra smiled weakly. "Did we win?" John chuckled, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "Yeah, we won. But the galaxy's still out there. And it's big. And it's mean." Lyra's eyes sparkled faintly. "Good. I'm ready." John grinned. "That's my girl." As the rust bucket prepared to leave the outpost, John knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had shown its teeth, but it hadn't reckoned with John Carter and his alien girl. Because when humanity fought back, it didn't stop until the universe knew their names.